All right, guys, just when you thought the fight for transparency here in the Commonwealth, here in Massachusetts was like cooling off, you could think again, because our state auditor, Diana DiZoglio, she just dropped a nuclear bomb on Beacon Hill. And now they are scattering like cockroaches when the lights turn on. All right. Before I get into this, I got to give credit where credit is due. Because if this was anybody else, do you think that they would continue this as vigilantly as she has been? I think anybody else would have thrown in the towel already. I really do. I think they would have thrown in the towel. You know what I'm saying? She has been consistent, and that is putting it lightly, because instead of backing down, she has lawyered up. That's right. She's lawyered up from a powerhouse law firm out of Boston. She even called the legislature an authoritarian regime. And given the circumstances, I really couldn't agree anymore. She also basically accused the AG of sabotaging the will of 72% of the voters here. And that's a fact, okay? That is what's happening. This isn't some kind of like procedural ping pong here. This is turning into a full-blown war on secrecy that could finally crack open this like black box, the state of state spending, okay? This, by the way, this is not uncommon. I want to just say this as well. This is not uncommon in a one-party majority. You could look no further than what I like to call the repeat offender states. You could look at California. You could look at Illinois. And of course, you could look at New York. Now, this isn't to say this does not happen in Republican states as well, but it is a little different because they've occasionally blocked or manipulated audits, but it's often to shield these executive agencies that they have or to control election narratives, which obviously is not good either, but it's far less common for GOP-controlled legislatures to outright block audits themselves, unlike the resistance we see here in Massachusetts with our Democratic stronghold. But the big difference here is that mainly Democratic-controlled legislatures have blocked more high-profile audits overall, especially if it's an audit of themselves. So I figured I'd get that out of the way. Now today, let's talk about the latest fireworks in this audit saga here. But let's rewind a little bit first to understand how we got to this point, just in case, people haven't been following. So it was back in November of 2024. That's when the voters here, they didn't just approve question one. They crushed question one, right? With a almost 72% yes vote, which provided Diana's office the explicit power to audit the legislature for the first time in decades. But then our lawmakers here, like the House Speaker, Ron Mariano, and the Senate President, Karen Spilka, they ended up hiring some fancy lawyers on your dime, of course, to argue that this was unconstitutional and it violates the separation of powers. Then what happened is there was like months of stonewalling with endless delays. And there was also this like absolute refusal to hand over any corresponding documents, anything pertaining to the audit in itself. Now, fast forward to this year, and the conflict continues, right? Diana basically, and I covered this, Diana basically begged the Attorney General, Andrea Campbell, who is another Democrat, by the way, to sue the legislature and, in turn, enforce the law. Now, Campbell is technically supposed to represent these state agencies in court. That would include the auditor and her people themselves. But instead, she ended up stalling and demanded these hypothetical documents on the scope of the audit while patting the back of the very people that she's meant to be checking on. Then comes April. Diana decided to waive the privilege, if you even want to call it that at this point, right? And she dumped what I think was around 150, maybe even more than that. It was 150 pages of correspondence to prove that she was cooperating. We covered that in a previous video too. But Campbell, she just keeps kicking the can down the road further and further and further. Even her own office, they got a $9 million budget boost for threats to democracy. This is your official hypocrisy alert, because Campbell sued Trump a dozen times, but won't touch this like voter betrayal at home. That's what it is. It's basically a voter betrayal. How convenient, okay? Now, here's where some new information, some new data kicks in, because just yesterday, which was August 6th, Diana went on GBH radio and she absolutely torched the legislature. And that's when she called them the authoritarian regime. And she said that they are obsessed with blocking this audit, and they're obsessed with blocking any levels of accountability. And she didn't stop there, because reports from both, it was Mass Live and the Boston Globe, they dropped articles stating that she hired the law firm Donnelly, Conroy, and Gelhar. And basically what she's trying to do is force some levels of a court showdown to potentially, they're using the writ of mandamus. We talked about that before too. And what that would do is bypass Campbell entirely by using these attorneys. But here's the twist. The bill for these attorneys isn't on us. It's not on the taxpayers. It's supposed to be covered by Michael Minogue, who is an ex-CEO of Abiomed, and he's a big GOP donor, and he potentially may be running in 2026 for governor. Okay, that's at least the word on the street. So now we've got, look at it this way. Now we have a Democratic auditor that's teaming up with a Republican heavyweight against her own party's elite regime. Now, I got to say something about this. What's surprising, at least to me, is that, like, look at it this way. It's surprising that no Democrat or like some heavyweight Democrat voter stepped up to fill this role. Don't you think? You know, I think the so-called party of tolerance is really outdoing themselves here, because they are totally tolerant of secrecy. They're tolerant of zero accountability. And it appears as though they're like allergic to transparency. Surprise, surprise. And as of today, which is August 7th, Diana, she was on X or Twitter, whatever you want to call it, and said, we have a right to an attorney, which basically puts Campbell on full blast for not just refusing to sue, but actively work to get the case dismissed immediately. That's the plan, okay? That's what I think Andrea Campbell's plan is. She's asked us to flood the AG's lines, pointing out how Campbell is somehow scheming behind the scenes with Mariano to dodge the courts forever. And I don't think this is just like conspiracy or paranoia here, guys, because it's backed by the coverage stating Campbell's warnings that unauthorized suits will get tossed per state law, right? But Diana, she ended up firing back to this. And she said, what did she say? She said, if the AG won't enforce the people's will, that she'll find a way around her. Now, if this lawsuit does end up landing, if this does, it could potentially head straight to the Supreme Judicial Court. And this would be like opening Pandora's box here. I mean, really, which I think is necessary, because I think it's necessary to restore the faith in a system ranked dead last in transparency nationwide. Okay? You know, do you ever wonder why this matters? This is what I think about why this matters beyond the headlines. Honestly, without audits, Beacon Hill is like a casino where the house always wins. Your taxes fund scandals from 3 indicted speakers in a row to no big contracts in the migrant crisis that, by the way, Diana already audited elsewhere. Her recent shelter probe, as you know, found overpayments, mismanagement, amongst other things, and she even recommended a forensic deep dive that could save the taxpayers millions of dollars. Do we think that's going to go anywhere? Probably not. But our legislature. I think that they are absolutely terrified of this because I think that it would expose their own waste, like the $300,000 travel tabs that Campbell racked up while blocking the oversight. This lawsuit is not optional. This is necessary. It's the only realistic path, at least to what I could see, to any levels of a real reform here. Now, if this lawsuit does indeed get blocked, the only other real alternative is to pursue another ballot initiative to impose public records laws on both the legislature and the governor's office. And apparently, they already are working on this with the petition, I believe, that was filed today, which is August 7th. This is kind of like playing 4D chess, in my opinion. Okay, this is like a 4D chess move. Because opening up public records, which could include documents like emails, like meeting recordings, votes, or even contracts, and these are areas, remember, that are currently exempt in Massachusetts. But let's be real for a second here. They could block this too, because Massachusetts, their political machine, obviously has this track record of squashing voter mandates, okay? They do. But let's think about, I want to talk about bigger picture here, because this is what I've been thinking about throughout yesterday and today, okay? If you start to think pragmatically about these things, and this is the way that it goes, at least this is what I'm thinking about. You know, the more time that passes by not allowing this audit to go through, and the more roadblocks the legislature ends up putting up, I would think that this would result in less support from the voters themselves. And the reason why is that I don't think that the voters here are that naive. And the reason that I don't think that they're that naive is because they voted for the audit in the first place. Okay? They voted for that audit in the first place. So they cannot be that naive. I feel like they know something. I truly think that they know something is going on. Otherwise, it wouldn't be at like this 72%. Okay? So the longer that Beacon Hill ends up dragging this out, the more it looks like they've got something to hide. And if there's one thing that erodes public trust faster than actual corruption, or let's say exposed corruption, is the suspicion that there's a potential corruption that is being covered up. That's what I think. You see what I'm saying here? Let's think about it like this. Every single delay, every single legal maneuver, every taxpayer-funded attorney they hire to fight a voter mandate just reinforces the idea that the legislature is more interested in protecting its own than being accountable to the people. That's what I think. And at a certain point, I would also think even party loyalists, they have to start asking, what are these people afraid of, right? What are they afraid of? Now, if they pull the same stunt with the public records request mandate as they did with the state audit, I think they are just driving the final nail even deeper into that coffin. And that's my opinion. So to put it simply, the longer these things get dragged out and the more vigilant Diana is with pursuing this and the more roadblocks the legislature ends up putting up, it's doing more damage to the legislature and to the brand itself. And a lot of people, I talk to a lot of people, guys, a lot of people are upset about this. Again, don't think the voters are that naive, okay? They voted for this. And the fact remains, if people feel they're being disenfranchised and people feel like they don't have a voice, that is the fastest way to radicalize somebody. It is. It's the fastest way. So again, the longer they stall on this, the worse it gets. And then the 4D chess is when they try to do the public records initiative, right? If that gets passed and then that won't go through as well, the legislature blocks that too, I mean, it's not going to look good, guys, okay? It's basically just more ammunition in the chamber, right? And it just looks awful. I'll just say it like it is. It looks absolutely awful. And that's my opinion. That is my opinion. So we'll see what happens with these attorneys and we'll stay up to date on this. But otherwise, that's it for today's video. That's my opinion. I'll see you on the next one. Bye-bye.